now, 2 years, where we try to break down maybe 4 newsworthy events from the prior month and try to make it relevant and kind of make it useful for small and mid-sized businesses and kind of what we can do to protect ourselves. Some organizations use it for security awareness training, and hopefully they do. Hope you all had a great Memorial Day weekend. Summer weather is finally upon us, and obviously we're the people that didn't take this week off. So with that, let's sit back for a half an hour and engage where you can. If you have questions, feel free to pop them in. We start, as we do every time, with reference back to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. If this is your first time seeing it, just know that there are 5 predominant areas that for security actions to unfold, whether it be anything from identifying data assets that you'd like to protect, all the way to having to recover from those assets because security was compromised, right? And you can't protect everything. And so as we kind of morph that slide, this is the one I prefer in terms of NIST Cybersecurity Framework, mainly for 3 reasons. One is everything on the left-hand side under identify, it's very important to begin to identify those data assets that are important to you. This is going to become critical for one of our stories, GDPR this month. You need to stay laser focused on the data it is that you're trying to protect. Not all data is of the same value. And if it's true that the data within our organizations is growing exponentially, you can't have your security needs growing exponentially. There's no budget for that, right? So it's time to refine our focus as to what assets we're trying to protect. And it doesn't mean ignore, but it does mean to value and prioritize some of those things. A second thing that comes out of this graph, in my opinion, is at the heart of things, you see detection. Most organizations are not doing a sufficient job of detecting what's going on in their arena. Just like we have backup reviews and we look at our backup logs on a daily basis to validate that things went the evening prior and so forth. What are we doing to look at our firewalls and our exposures on a daily, weekly, hourly basis? What are we doing from an antivirus perspective? What are we doing on the servers to do the detection? How do we aggregate all those logs even into a centralized console so we can really get a good security picture? Notice that detection is really at the heart of things. And the third takeaway from this graph, in my opinion, is the weighting of prevention versus reaction. You'll notice they're equal. Yet in our minds and oftentimes in our budgets, we spend so much time and money and resources on the protection portion of things and not an equal amount of time to, well, I didn't protect things, now something happened. How am I going to respond? How am I going to recover? What does my incident response plan look like? My disaster recovery, of that nature. So reaction and prevention should have equal weighting. Kind of with that as the backdrop, let's dive into this month's stories and what's hit us in the news. Hopefully you've all had a chance to catch up on some of the news. I think your emails are likely getting flooded, maybe even news stories with warnings from the FBI with regards to home and small business routers. And certainly that will be one of our stories for the month because that has been extremely newsworthy, especially in the past week or so. We're also going to discuss GDPR. As of last Friday, GDPR is fully in effect, starting on May 25th. And so what does that mean to you? Have you dismissed it as a notion? Just wanted to kind of touch on it lightly and offer you opportunity to kind of get some insight as to what people are doing around GDPR right now. Another newsworthy story is with regards to location services. This actually ties nicely into GDPR as it turns out, but a number of breaches with regards to location data that have surfaced this month, and a really good blog post from another gentleman named Kurt Krebs who kind of breaks down some of the legalities, and we're not going to dive into all the details on it, but just kind of discuss location services quickly. And the last one I wanted to chat about was really about some mega studies. It's around this time of year that, and maybe in a different order in terms of which ones are most notorious, but Verizon comes out with their breach report, Cisco comes out with their annual report, FBI, Microsoft, Symantec comes out with their Internet Security Threat Report. So I had a great opportunity the last couple of weeks to get some insights into those reports, and just wanted to give you a few digestible nuggets from those. So, without further ado, let's get started with newsworthy item number 1. In the news, you'll find that there's something called the VPNFilter. This also might be called the Russian router issue, or however it might come to you. But long story short is small businesses as well as home devices have been infected. And they're saying to the tune of 500,000 devices have been infected already. This is the infection and the malware that infected these routers, especially the ones listed on the right, though that is not an exclusive list. These infected devices contain malware already. That was literally stage 1 of their infection process, and just like any unfolding security hack, there was a stage 2 and a stage 3. Fortunately, the FBI caught wind of this due to some of the providers, such as Symantec, Microsoft, and others, as well as sensors that are out there, and they noticed this malware going out there. Stage 2 and Stage 3, what was going to happen is they were going to be launching some IoT initiatives, or basically use the processing power of these routers to attack other websites and so forth. Now, unfortunately, Stage 2 and Stage 3 were disrupted as the malware, was sort of poorly written. It only had a few web servers to take advantage of, and the FBI was able to legally take some of those down. So the FBI at this point, though, is warning that there are still 500,000 devices out there with malware on them, and they are recommending that even to home users to reboot your routers. Okay, and this will clear the stage 1 malware that is infected on it. Stage 1 malware can be used for other nefarious activities. Through manual coding, they basically have access to inside of your network and so forth. So if you have a home-based router, if you have a small business that has a router, be cognizant of VPNFilter. Take a look on the internet for advice with regards to that, especially obviously from trusted sources. You can only imagine there's other bad actors that are hoping to take advantage of misinformation. But the VPNFilter virus malware is real, and we ask you to reboot your router. Okay. If anyone has any questions on those things, obviously bring them up, or Nate will cue me with regards to some of those items. Number 2 is GDPR. And just kind of for a quick explanation of GDPR, I put together some very simple graphics. This mostly is about, and I use the name Simon and Natalia to describe, this is about European residents. And immediately in your mind you might think, all right, good. I'm not a European resident, so it doesn't impact me. However, what this is really about is Simon and Natalia are European residents that we've chosen in terms of names. Their information, which contains either their name, email address, or any of the listings on the right-hand side, and in fact, very generically, anything about them is protected. Okay, and what the European Union, which is the second largest legislative body in the world, has decided to do is protect them. They've classified them as data subjects, and they've classified people that operate with their data as controllers or processors. And if you're a controller or processor, you have to grant Natalia and Simon, or any European Union person, a Bill of Rights. Okay, it's very similar probably to the Bill of Rights that, if you may recall, they were trying to pass for airline passengers, right? Oh, we were sitting on the tarmac for 4 hours, and that's unreasonable, and how long should we wait for planes, and so forth. This is about several inalienable rights that they have as European citizens. So, for example, they have the right to be informed as to where and how their data is used. They have to you have to grant them access to use their data. If they want their data back, you have to provide it to them. If they want you to stop and erase all of their data from your systems, you have to do so. And if you have a breach, you have to notify them. So when it comes down to it, Simon and Natalia have got extensive rights if you're holding any of their data at your organization. And it doesn't matter where your organization resides. It could maybe have a branch office in Europe, but certainly doesn't need to. It could be a US-based company that simply holds data on customers that buy tennis rackets, and you happen to have Simon's email address or his IP address. There's very broad coverage with regards to what data Simon and Natalia are entitled to, and furthermore, the notification rules and your ability to say, hey, I want my data back, is just going to be surfaced starting this week. And what it essentially means in kind of a little more detail, and I won't dive into a ton of detail now, but you're seeing hopefully in your inboxes, you've probably seen a lot of privacy email updates in the last few weeks. Facebook, Microsoft, your internet provider, Google, pretty much any service you use, Box, Dropbox, all of them have updated their privacy policies. Well, imagine that. That's because they had to, and they want to provide you consent and notification. There's also been several applications that were web providers that had to put out notification statements to say, do you consent to use our business? Right now they're only getting 20% hit rates, meaning they're losing 80% of their customers right now due to the fact that they now have to get consent to use that data. So a fair amount of stuff is happening in the discover phase of this. There's other phases, and again, I won't dive into a ton of detail here, but on the manage, how are you planning on surfacing data about these users if you have their data? What systems might their data sit in? And this should sound a lot like the identify phase of the NIST cybersecurity framework. Down in the bottom right under protect, there are 60 plus security controls that you're responsible for and must have a plan for, and basically have verifiable capabilities to protect the data if their data resides on your systems. Where do you sit relative to those security controls? And then the last portion is a 72-hour notification rule and several other things with regards to reporting on any breach of data. Are you prepared? Do you have an incident response plan? Who's going to communicate on your behalf? Do you have a forensics team to help you clarify what has happened on your systems, or are you just going to make a notification? Things of that nature. So these are some of the areas by which organizations are trying to gel their activities. I just wanted to kind of give you a preview of what GDPR was. This idea of protecting and privacy around data is going to be equally important as we kind of go into story number 3 here. So let's we'll move on, but understand that the Europeans have done something relatively intelligent that will be, I'm sure Facebook leakage from a few weeks ago certainly has got our Congress thinking about, hey, what should we be doing to protect the data of our U.S. citizens? And certainly there's been conversations about modeling our own legislation around the GDPR rules. And lo and behold, wow, May was quite the month for leakage of data, and this data was not just credentials. In this case, this was location data. We had a significant, in fact, we had 4 significant breaches of data in the month of May. Kind of start with the one that's pictured on the right-hand side. There was a service that many of us likely did not use, but it was called something called Location Smart. And Location Smart is a web tracking service that has the data, and this is through major providers such as AT&T and Verizon and so forth. They outsource location data for all their phones to Location Smart so that people can take advantage of location data for your phone. So your data and where you were located was possible to find out last month and for several months before that because there was a flaw in their website where you could essentially just type in a mobile address number, and because of an unpatched web server, pretty much anyone had access to that mobile device's location, and that was real time without consent. Okay. So that was that's a large provider for multiple carriers, AT&T, Verizon, and about 8 others. And that was one of 4 breaches I mentioned. There was another one called Securus, where they were selling real-time location to state and local law enforcement officials. So it was, for law enforcement activities, so that they could go track the bad guys, if you will. However, some of the accounts to log into the Securus website were compromised. And in fact, dozens were obtained by hackers. And so hackers had ability to act like law enforcement officials and find out location information for phones. So that was more privacy information that was shared. And two others that basically had to do with buggy websites. T-Mobile had a problem, and they're just a small provider, and then Comcast. But basically, T-Mobile, you could put in a cell phone, and through a little bit of trickery, you could get the full name, address, account number, and in some cases tax IDs by just putting in a cell phone. And on Comcast, for which many of us might have this service at home, you could trick the website this past month because of a bug to provide the home address of your wireless router and the Wi-Fi name and password. So all of these things being said, and all of these are dictated and outlined in more detail on the blog on the bottom left, but location services, ironically, if we kind of go back a few pages, location services, you'll notice about 3/4 the way down, is one of the protected aspects of GDPR. And certainly I as an individual, probably you as individuals, and certainly the employees of your organization have this inherent feeling that location is one of those protected items. And indeed in GDPR it is. But what the blog goes on to explain is that the FTC and the FCC, which are both mandated to protect and privacy of data, really kind of have conflicting statements on it and have conflicting ideals and motives with regards to the protection as well as resources. So kind of an interesting read, not a very long read, but interesting to think about location services as it impacts to your employees. Maybe you use location services as part of your business for where your trucks are and your assets maybe that are driving for the firm. So in any case, location information, a lot of breaches this month in that department, and kind of a worthy topic to discuss. One of the things I guess I would reiterate on this is that on the Securus hack, keep in mind that that hack it's a legitimate service selling the real-time location to state and law enforcement, but it was dozens of law enforcement accounts that were obtained by hackers. Wow. So it's just a name and a password, and I was able to get into a system. Name and a password to get into a system is no longer high enough security threshold. And so with that, let's dive into story number 4. I call this small business, big issue. This is where I try to summarize, some substantial reports that came out from Symantec in the upper right with their Internet Security Threat Report. Just came out in the month of, I think, March. 2018 Data Breach Investigations Report, which comes out from Verizon. It's their 11th issue of it. I had the good fortune of attending a in-person seminar downtown Chicago at the Federal Reserve Bank, and there was several people of note at the Verizon, and basically the agenda topic for it was to have the lead investigator for the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. His name was Dave Ostertag. His title is Global Investigations Manager. And he basically went through the report and provided us some summary thoughts from his perspective. We also got the good fortune of, at the FBI InfraGard meeting that I was attending, of listening to the new special agent in charge of Chicago. This gentleman his name is Jeffrey Salet. I'll say L-L-E-T, I think it's Salet. And he basically was in charge of the Unabomber investigation out in Boston. He was one of 5 people from the FBI that was point with regards to 9/11 investigations. So Chicago got themselves a really high-ranking FBI official, and it was certainly nice to hear from him. I also had the good fortune last week of hearing the FBI at another event. This was the Oak Brook Chamber, where the FBI came in and provided some details with regards to what they're seeing. But in all of these instances, and whether it be these reports that we're hearing, FBI speaking, at the Oak Brook Chamber, I heard College of DuPage CIO, Indiana Tech CIO. What we're hearing dramatically are, I put a few nuggets on the screen. A, there's no difference between a small business and a large business. Okay, you're seeing the same levels of spam, ransomware, and web threats per employee as an enterprise organization. However, you don't have nearly the resources or tools to fight against it. Bottom right-hand corner, I'd call out 58% of the victims were categorized as a small business in the data breach report. So, a significant flashlight is being pointed at small businesses, knowing that they're likely underserved in the resource perspective. I thought the who's behind the breaches that I kind of put up there on the screen was interesting. To know that there is a mix of inside and outside, as oftentimes people only think about hacking, and kind of disparately so. So those were some interesting graphics. But if there was one takeaway, I wanted to point out that the FBI just kept hammering home, as well as I was seeing in the reports, is that we're seeing a significant amount of breaches, oftentimes through spear phishing, and this idea that identity is really a strong part of things. And so I put up our security wheel, if you will, there, but I would point to with an arrow, and literally in this case in the PowerPoint I do point to it. Identity is the key aspect that's getting people into the data. It doesn't matter what controls, whether you have a great firewall in place and a great antivirus. If you're not protecting your identity, you're doing yourself a disservice. So the one thing I heard from everyone all the time was MFA, 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 or multi-factor authentication. Use multiple factors to get in, and that's where things are at. And so I only reiterate what I said last month, which I hopefully covered in detail, and hopefully you were able to attend. I won't cover it in significant detail here, but we have an offering, your Office 365 service that you might be leveraging has a built-in multi-factor authentication capability. There are third-party products out there, but long story short is you should be evaluating what data you'd like to protect and looking at identity protection, probably using Office 365 multi-factor or another as a logical means for protecting that. So that's kind of my reiterating summary story, if you will, there. So I would point out we have, ironically, a busy June. We usually try to take the foot off the gas pedal a little bit here, but there's just so many things going on that we wanted to provide you opportunities for deeper dives. You're going to see some emails from our organization. We're trying to provide some thought leadership around both DFARS compliance, which is if you're providing any sort of, if you're a supplier or a provider to the defense industry, they're going to ask you either upstream or downstream from you if you're DFARS compliant. We want to make sure you're knowledgeable as to what that is. So on June 5th, we'll take some time for that. GDPR, we're going to dive in much more deeply on what tools are available for you to begin your journey down GDPR if you haven't started it already, or supplement it. This Office 365 Complete Security, there's a number of things that are coming up, especially email encryption, a lot of features that people don't even know are available. We're going to cover those in some detail on another webinar. And then we have an in-person event I want to make sure you're aware of. I think last time we discussed it, and I just said save the date, but we have a formal registration up and running, and that event will be at the end of this month on the 28th, I believe, Nate. And that event will have a number of speakers. We're going to be doing a road tripping, if you will, at four walkable restaurants, and kind of walking between them, having some fun, and hearing some decent discussions about security as we go do it. As you know, some primers over on the right-hand side. We try to blog a